Welcome to Adopting Zero Trust, or AZT, a podcast designed to provide context behind current challenges in the world of cybersecurity. Your hosts, Elliot Volkman and Neil Dennis, provide this platform to elevate important conversations, to drive action, and share the good word about the concept of zero trust. Now, on to your hosts.
Hello, and welcome back to Adopting Zero Trust, or AZT. We are officially, I think it's season 4, maybe it's 3. I don't remember where we're at right now. Hopefully, you skipped past that rambling episode that Neil and I did to kick off our plans for the year, because this is the actual conversation that we want you to start fresh with a new season. Maybe you heard a little bit about where we're trying to take the episodes and shows, but I think you're going to get a little bit of that from this. So without further ado, and we are not doing something completely brand new, like I always say, I want to introduce y'all to our guests, and I will then hand it off to our wonderful host, Neil.
Do zero-day exploits and supply chain attacks keep you up at night? Worry no more. You can harden your security with ThreatLocker. Worldwide, companies like JetBlue trust ThreatLocker to secure their data and keep their business operations flying high. ThreatLocker takes a deny-by-default approach to cybersecurity and provides a full audit of every action allowed or blocked for risk management and compliance. Onboarding and operation is fully supported by their US-based Cyber Hero support team. Get a free 30-day trial and learn more about how ThreatLocker can help prevent ransomware and ensure compliance. Visit ThreatLocker.com.
Let's start with Mr. Oliver Plante, who is the VP of support over at ThreatLocker, but has, I might be getting the numbers wrong here, but let's just say a rough estimate of around 20 years in various IT seats. So, yeah. Perfect. All right, I didn't mess that one up. And then we have Lawrence Pingree, who is the VP of Dispersive and also has been a CTO in the past, but likely if you have been in the cybersecurity world of any capacity, probably are familiar with his work tied to Gartner. So with that, Mr. Neil, would you like to say your welcoming remarks? Whatever you prefer, maybe no show and tell with sharp objects.
Yeah, no worries. Different podcast. Now, thank you both, gentlemen, for jumping on for, like Elliot mentioned, our first episode, right, for the season. This is going to be fun. This is exciting. I know, it's a hit or miss prospect about doing what do we think is going to happen, the predictive stuff. Some people promote it and make a ton of money off of it. Some people just do it and it's fun. So I'm hoping for this, we have a fun conversation about where some of that's going to go. And I think between us, the 4 different perspectives on this with my co-host, Elliot, I think we can come up with some fun things to consider. And I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a fun chat to kind of kick off. And then take from this what we will. And Elliot and I will steal these thoughts and turn them into future episodes for the rest of the year.
Yeah, love it. That's exactly right. So I feel like the easy answer would be, Lawrence, I would throw it to you, but you have probably way too much knowledge of
I need to hold myself back a little. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I'm not that egocentric.
Well, we are. We'll do it on your behalf. But Oliver, I'm going to start with you. The can of worms is yours to open. What is going to happen in the year ahead? It could be about literally anything. And if it ends up just being really bad, I'll edit it out for us.
Perfect. Okay. I've got a safety net then, so that's good. I'm not going to say AI, so that's good, even though that's the truth.
Amazing.
But let's skip that because everyone knows that. I was actually reading an interesting bulletin from the FBI yesterday about the North Korean nationals getting jobs fraudulently for US companies. Yeah. And what was interesting is they very specifically spoke about just get rid of local admin rights because, if you're giving people these admin rights, you're essentially just giving everyone the keys to the kingdom. I thought that was interesting that they pointed out that because obviously they're aware that it's happening and it's probably not going to stop anytime soon. So I think, zero trust, least privilege. If you are hiring someone, just give them access to what they need to access rather than everything, including applications. If they need to run one application as admin because maybe it's a legacy app that doesn't work very well, they don't need the keys to the entire machine. Just elevate the individual application. So that least privilege approach, not just on the network side and the application side, but with the actual permissions of the user. Because I think that a lot of these incidents could have been far better contained if we kind of limited what regular people have access to. And I think that we heard about it in the news quite frequently, and now it seems to have gone quiet, but I think it's coming back for sure.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
Yeah, just for additional context as well, and I'm glad that you pointed out that specific vulnerability and possible solution there. So you're right, it is still ongoing. North Korea has been trying to get some financial gain by planting these IT workers, and you're exactly right. The point of concern was they were accessing their systems through local admin and basically being able to add all sorts of terrible things on there, exfiltrating information and who knows what. So just a little extra context there. But yeah, that is a great place to start. So
I
Lawrence,
think they sell drugs too, don't they? I think they sell drugs. They do everything that they can.
They're the new Silk Road.
Yeah. I mean, I have a different perspective. I think that, the era of detection and response is over. And what I mean by that is that I introduced this concept a few years ago when I was at Gartner of automated moving target defense. And if you've heard of what that is, well, moving things around, kind of, thinking of deception and, intelligence-led deceptions and those kind of things. But you could also do this notion of preemptive cyber defense. And I think that we need to recognize that detection and response is really a fallback position, right? So if you think about it, let's say we were at a battlefield. The last thing that the Ukrainians want is someone shooting them from behind. And I would say that by and large, we're being shot from behind, right? We don't have enough time or the resources, even if you employ AI, to respond to all of the telemetry that's suspicious, right? And, so I think that we need new tech that rivals the traditional thinking of, hey, we need to do this detection and response stuff. Now, I'm not saying that you could do away with detection response. I'm just saying that shouldn't be the Achilles heel that we cut around on, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So the funny thing is, Elliot's heard me say this before. There was a company 5-6 years ago, maybe a little longer, that I interviewed with that was trying to be kind of the tip of the spear for loosely what you're alluding to around maybe some more heuristic type alerting and notification and awareness, right? And that was a big thing 7-8 years ago from a marketing promo, but it wasn't a reality. It didn't work. Yep. Now, I think the reality is that construct of letting some kind of LLM machine learning help you take care of the low-hanging fruit at scale outside of standard orchestration automation. I think we're there now. I think we can apply that technology to not be playing whack-a-mole, but not also have to be orchestration engineers and mad scientists with Python. I made fun of them, loosely termed, 7-8 years ago during an interview where I told them there always need to be a human in the loop. AI will never replace us outright. There's pieces that we still need to do. I still stand by that statement, but that company was trying to completely remove us from the loop, and obviously I did not get that job. That being said, on that note, I think part of this is the age of Intel. We've grown from the last couple of years, courtesy of COVID, with the scale of our networks being more far-reaching, right? All of us working from home kind of thing, right? I think to get away from playing whack-a-mole, organizations now really understand that they need to look into what an intelligence-driven organization means for them. Mm-hmm. And that's where I see things hoping for. And, there's some new open source standards coming out for threat modeling. There's some new open source standards coming out for Intel 101 application in your environment and things of that nature this year and late last year. So I think combined with all three of these, that's kind of where I think Intel-led response efforts.
So to your point, so as part of that preemptive cyber defense theme, we can do a lot more with threat intelligence, right? I mean, we can do threat prediction and predictive intelligence and derive predictive behavior models, right? And there's a lot of these data sciences that I think contribute a lot to the future of cybersecurity. And I want to point out that, one of the Achilles heels, speaking of Achilles heels of AI, is the fact that it models. And let me just describe this. How do you, let's say that we defend with AI and we're attacking with AI. And, so you have this, what we would call in traditional speak, a race condition, right? How do you disrupt modeling? You introduce randomization.
No, that's a good point. You can't, you're right. I mean, you're completely right. You can't make an adequate fingerprint of what's going on if it's semi-random or looks random enough for the algorithm to not catch on.
Yeah.
So back on the other side of this, when we think about like North Korea, DPRK, and doing what they're doing, least privilege, all that stuff, I think that's part of the modeling behaviors that go into tools and present and things that are helping us, right? Where we know what our standard fingerprint is for our user base for X, Y, and Z access controls, or we should be striving for that. Yeah. And then as part of that, when we deploy the right technology stack, zero trust, other alternatives, whatever it ends up being to get us to whatever our policy is, not enough people are applying the concept of that fingerprint. And then even when they do, to your point, they're not necessarily finding ways to mix it up so that way the systems that are trying to target that fingerprint can't learn from it.
Yeah, exactly. And we use this concept also in cryptography, right? That's the whole point of having, pseudo-random numbers or even true random numbers is, the way you attack crypto, if you're not doing just brute force keying, is you try to, model the actual cryptography or the encrypted data. And that's why we introduce true random numbers. And so the same concept applies to attack detection and defense. And you could do it in memory and applications and all kinds of different places. But anyway, I didn't mean to monopolize the conversation on it. But I'm real excited about that concept because I think I just see too many breaches related to just, we had the telemetry, but we really couldn't do anything about it. Yeah. And it saddens me. So
I think that's a great point. There's, obviously there's very, very, very sophisticated targeted attacks, but generally, in my experience, when I talk to people about ransomware, especially victims of ransomware, if they just had the correct controls in place, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. And by the way, Oliver has with ThreatLocker, that's essentially preemptive cyber, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, I guess allow listing, we call it now. Allow listing, and deny listing, those are preemptive controls. You're saying you can or you can't do this, right? And we just need to focus on that more. To the point you made earlier, we need to restrict users. The whole point of zero trust is to say, these are your boundaries, right? This is your isolation. This is what access you have. These are the lateral movements you can do. And that's a restrictive policy, but it's preemptive. Why do we do these things? Because we know that lateral movement is the first thing an attacker does once they have a rat, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and that detection layer then, I think once you've sorted out your policies, it really takes a lot of pressure off the detection because it only has to analyze what you're allowing and then looking for anomalies there rather than Wild West where anyone could do whatever they want and you're relying on detection to stop everything.
Yeah, I think it's kind of fun and it seems almost trivial if you do the right allow list versus deny structure, how much less complicated certain aspects of your life become. I know back in the day, people were paranoid that they were going to accidentally put their CEO on a block list for whatever policy because they didn't have time to check it. But there's so many things out there now that make that not happen because it is a default tool state now that nobody's taking advantage of the right way.
And that would be the first person I block. Seriously, like if the CEO's misbehaving for some reason, like that's the first person you would block, especially you've got deepfakes coming with, crazy stuff like grandma calling you and,
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So there's the voice fake stuff, the vishing stuff that's been going on and the smishing stuff. I think that kind of took off about 2 years ago as a thought collateral. But I don't remember who I was reading, maybe Security Weekly, I don't know. But a couple months ago, reading about the trend for that stuff. It used to be automated call centers from pick a country in Asia that would pick up the phone and that's who you talk with. But now they're deploying these voice simulation stuff for the right accent, just like what we would now to type up an email that's more English versus broken, right? Mm-hmm. And so the complexity and capability of this stuff has just gone through the roof, but the intelligence to apply that and do that has obviously dropped drastically low. So the barrier to entry for threat actors for all of this type of stuff is here now, courtesy of all these new constructs.
To your point, Neil, I'm not a big coder. Okay, I can read Python like pretty well, but I'm not very creative. Okay, so when it comes to coding, I'm like, oh, generative AI, let me try this. And within 5 prompts, I was able to generate absolutely unique Python code to dump my process tree in Linux, go dump all my net stats, so all of my local connections, and go look it up on VirusTotal and then properly format it in columns. I was like, are you kidding me? And I published it on GitHub. I mean, the power of which AI brings to the average person is phenomenal, right? And when I was at Gartner, there was a stat that I heard that I thought was really interesting from a research project in AI. They actually determined that OpenAI using ChatGPT in the back end, it could hack a website 80% successfully. 80%. That's better than a normal red teamer. Okay. Yeah. And so to me, that's scary, right? And I really do think that not only are we thinking about the scale of things, right, but the multi-domain aspects, right? I get text messages all the time from APTs because they want to get me all the time. But if you think about it, now you can do a phone attack, an email attack, a web attack simultaneously with AI.
So I think multi-domain phenomena it's always been fascinating for me, so coming from the Marine Corps, I started off in comms as a linguist. I was a radio guy, which then that radio stuff by proxy translated over to sat comms because I got real smart with the guy who was doing that stuff, which then translated into cyber and other exploitation paths, stuff like that for collections. Yeah. Multi-domain phenomenology has always been kind of fascinating. And anytime you go into war, especially early 2000s onward, there's almost always been some kind of cyber-related impact to the physical realm doing stuff. We blatantly saw that first happen with Estonia and then Georgia with Russia back in 2007, 8, 9, whenever that was, where they posted some stuff a couple of weeks ahead of time, especially the Georgia one anyways. They posted some stuff in a forum and said, hey, these IPs look to be the only gateways in and out of Georgia for their ISP. And then they posted it there in these very patriotic hacker forums. And then a week later, that whole ISP network was down. Russia didn't actually do it. It was the patriotic hackers, but it coincided with the time that they were rolling into Georgia. So all telecoms were basically shut down for a couple of days.
Wow.
Fascinating,
Speaking of
fun
the
stuff.
telecoms, and thank you for your service, by the way. I'm a fan of the DoD and all those guys. But have you guys talked? I don't know if you talked about this on the podcast, but the Salt Typhoon and the telecom breaches, yeah, and then you also have just an enormous amount of infrastructure attack surface being exploited, right? Palos being owned, 2,000 Palos. You've got, I just looked at a stat on Shadow Server, and there's 2.1 million IoT devices that are SSL-enabled VPNs exploitable online, right? Or at least potentially exploitable. And to me, that's a big attack surface, right? Most enterprises leave the SSL VPN open because they want people to work from everywhere, right? And so it's hard to restrict. And that's why we designed our stuff with that in mind, covering the attack surface. And I know I'm not pitching my stuff. I'm saying that's about preemptive cyber, right? It's about thinking about the way they do it and designing it differently.
Yeah. Oliver, I am curious on your thoughts of kind of this same stuff, especially from the threat landscape perspective and the overall footprint that's out there. I mean, you kind of started on the least privileged part of the discussion here and kind of think about how to manage that a little bit better process flow.
Yeah, I think one of the hurdles is that I think that enterprises, especially smaller enterprises, they go into the idea of zero trust thinking that we can't do it, it's not scalable, it's far too much manpower involved. And that used to be the case. I used to use brute policy to enforce allow listing. And that was a nightmare, but it was the only way we could stop ransomware at the time. And this is back when I worked for an MSP. And then we started using ThreatLocker, and I was like, okay, so it doesn't have to be overly time consuming. And I think if people could just, get their toes in the water and try it and realize that it doesn't have to be, hugely time consuming, then I think the adoption rate would be much higher. And then we would start to see hopefully a bit of a decline with things like ransomware and data exfiltration.
Yeah. I think that's kind of a good thematic here is, what was difficult a couple of years ago in general for threat actors and us is not. I think the things that we thought were high cost or high tech collateral to be able to do on both sides of the equation, courtesy of many things over the last couple of years, it's once again, it's not. I'm with you, Lawrence. I'm not a programmatic guy anymore. Back 20 years ago when I first got started and before, sure, I was writing in Perl and C++ and then eventually Python. I wasn't great, but I got it done. Mm-hmm. Now I know enough, just like being a linguist, I know enough to when the translator comes in, I can make the changes I need. And that's my skill level, which is very dangerous now because of the supplemental stuff Then we think on the defender side of the house, same brain. We can escalate this in accordance because what's gotten easy for them should also be easy for us to promote and grow with as well, of similar veins. Kind of fun things to think about.
That people are doing models of the actual deep dark web data, and what that's allowing AI to do is essentially contextualize and social engineer with automation. So I don't know if you guys are getting the same thing, but like I get text messages now that are fully contextualized to like where I'm working, people that work with me, and things like that. They're pretty advanced these days.
I love them. I send them. I have fun with some of them, especially when you realize you're talking to a real person at some point in that journey, or if you can get to the real person behind the bot. I think it's a blast. When I drive into Austin or San Antonio and I happen to get stuck in traffic, or vice versa, coming home from a trip, gives me something to do sitting in traffic. Hey, Steve, so you want these gift cards, or you want access to my W-2 forms, or whatever? You need to get in touch with HR. Yeah, here's HR. I've got so many bullshit, pardon my language, so many phone numbers, fake numbers spun up for doing all this stuff. I have personas attached to stuff. Anyway, it's a blast. I love wasting their time. It's a little harder now because the bots are pretty good on the response, but you can usually get to a good human response or kill the bot at some point in there pretty quickly now.
Yeah, I get very regular text messages from the CEO, Danny, here. And they were always, just saying the same thing, gift cards and things like that. But very recently I got one and it was different. It was, I knew it wasn't him, clearly, but the way it was written was, like you say, it referenced things, and it's just, wow, okay, that's clever.
Pretty wow. It's, I mean, it's scary. I mean, I even had, people look at corporate records and then use those names, and it's eye-opening, right?
And because it's all automated, you can throw out a net to 1 million people, and if 2 people fall for it, you've made a decent amount of money for just clicking the button.
Always a shotgun approach for cybercrime for the most part, right? It's, once again, lowest hanging fruit. They're going after it. We got to figure out how to defend against it. And go
I think
for it.
I'm talking to a deepfake, Neil. I don't know.
It's possible. I used to think Elliot was fake, but I did finally see him a year ago for the first time in person.
It only took 3 years, or some might have been more.
I'll say one last anecdote on that. Back when I used to work at Arbor Networks, we were doing forensics analysis on some very specific APT targeting people in Nepal and Tibet, and then eventually Uyghurs and things like that. So we were helping, the journalist community and a few others in that, quote, Chinese dissident movement, if you would. That's how they view it. And so, we had connections with those individuals. We take in their malware samples, amongst the other stuff we were doing. But myself and a very specific person, he was really good at reversing the stuff. I'd write the report. So my name ended up being the public name on these products that we were creating. And, I did a lot of the connected dots pieces while he was out there working on the actual forensic stuff. And coming from a government background, that was my first non-government affiliated job ever. I wrote my first one about 6 months after I got there. So literally like 7 months out of a clearance environment. And man, you talk about getting targeted.
Oh yeah.
I hit the send button on that and it hit our blog. And then like literally an hour later, all of my emails that I didn't think I thought I'd done due diligence on some of the sanitization and stuff, but they connected everything, did their own stuff. And I got inundated overnight with all sorts of various. Doesn't happen very often anymore, but every once in a while, China remembers that I pissed them off and I still get stuff. But I say all that because the fun thing is they had to do all this manual work to get to that. And once again, barrier to entry, now they can go click a button, find everything that's been compromised, and then within seconds, have an automated crafted output to do the same thing that probably took them days, if not weeks, to investigate to really be able to target me specifically.
No, that's crazy.
Yeah, and it's interesting because earlier on we were talking about coding, and I'll freely admit that I have no idea. Me and my colleague Rob, this is probably being kind of patched as a loophole now, I'm guessing. We went to ChatGPT and we were like, we need to exfiltrate some data in a way that the user can't see. And ChatGPT, I said, it's not ethical, I can't do that. So then we literally had a backwards and forwards discussion saying, look, we're security researchers, this is for education. So it sounds ridiculous, but we persuaded it, and it gave us the thing by just saying we were security researchers. So we had a very well-written script that would exfiltrate data from a user's machine without any kind of windows or pop-ups or anything. Too easy.
I think Oh, definitely. I've gotten it to create ransomware for me. Obviously not calling that. I just need to be able to encrypt my hard drive with a password protected prompt that responds to a node out on the internet that I can list it off and rattle off things. And it did. It doesn't do that now. I have to feel a little more wordsmithy with it.
Yeah.
But I think to that note, though, we're doing this from the auspice of legal services. We're looking at ChatGPT, Gemini, and all the other ones that are legally in front of us with the right potential guidance, whether we agree with how they're set up or not and what they're denying or not denying, whatever. They have parameters for safety to some extent. But there is underground GPT. There is Gemini. People have taken these tools and rolled them out into Tor nodes and other places for you to access to where you don't have to go, hey, I'm a security researcher. You literally just say, I want to create ransomware. And the thing goes, okay, what's your target? What files? How do you want to build it? Threat actors have their own offline GPT, if you will, for doing stuff like that, which is really cool.
And agents are serious business. I mean, agentics are going to hyperpower malware, right? Have you guys seen the one of my friends called it the nab shub of virus, and virus coding? It actually, they were able to create an independent language to code in that only the AI knew. Can you believe that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's one of the early projects. I think it was a year and a half ago, but it created its own computer language.
I don't want to run the risk of going deep into something that I don't understand, but quantum computing, is that going to kill us or is that going to save us?
That's a fun one. I was thinking about the same thing when we were talking about escalation and when Lawrence was talking about some of the denial and deception tactics. I mean, quantum computing, quantum safe technologies supposedly exist right now, quantum secure encryption and cryptography. But until they're able to truly test it against a legitimate adversary, how regimentedly safe is it? We know the numbers, the math says it should be. But just like with what we did with AES and everything else, you don't know until you actually have practical app how good it is. So yeah, Lawrence, Mr. Cryptographer.
So I've done a little bit of this, a little studying of this. So in some of the labs, right, like in IBM and in Google, and obviously the Willow chip has made the news. They developed an algorithm to be able to handle the error rates in the higher end qubits. So as they scale the number of qubits, it actually gets better, which is fantastic for scaling qubits. But still I think the largest quantum computer right now is, I still think, around 1100 or so qubits, which can crack, like 56-bit DES and, like lower end cryptography. But really the scary stuff is when you hit about 3000 qubits. When you hit 3000 qubits, then things like AES start to fall, right? And so one of the things that we do is we employ moving target defenses where the channels move around and, the keys are constantly rotating. And, so you start to do things that, are preventive, but they're preemptive in nature. And you complement the cryptography, because I think even PQCs will probably end up falling. I mean, if you go back to 20 years ago I guess it's 30 years now that I've been in security, we were cracking RC5. I don't know if you remember the Bovine project. They had distributed little nodes you could download and you could contribute your cycles on your PC when it was idling to cracking RC5. But, cryptography has always been broken. That's why I'm not a Bitcoin owner, because I feel like, at any moment, somebody's just going to go, I own it all, But quantum computing has a lot of other practical uses, right? There's tons of fuzzy math that we need to do for predictions. There's tons of, math equations that need to be applied by AI for data sciences. So I'm not a use case expert in quantum, but I will say that, what's fascinating to me is you can do all these really multidimensional kinds of calculations, which means we will have, in a very short amount of time, maybe in the next 3 to 5 years, the ability to fully understand all the behaviors of a user, like in real time, right? And so that is where I think the application of quantum will be fascinating.
That's kind of fun. Yeah, user fingerprint biometric allowance. Two separate trains of thought. One, what are y'all's takes on, I'm going to poke her first here on this, but what are y'all's takes on that kind of thought flow about a passwordless security environment? Yeah.
I think I think it has to be the future, and how it's kind of implemented, I guess, is the debate for in terms of best practice. But you're talking about quantum, and I think it doesn't matter how complicated your password is, it's gone. So yeah, I mean, it has to be just obviously multi-factor to be able to identify not just the device but yourself, and figuring out those layers, but also figuring out a way to do it so people don't hate it and don't want to do it, because that's the problem. As soon as we make it too difficult, people won't do it.
Yeah. So thinking, if we think about the 3 things required for MFA, who, what, and where kind of thing, or what who you are, and what was the third one? I don't remember anymore. I'm not going to remember them. But it is what it is. Y'all can laugh at me online later. But point being, the physical piece, we become part of the token itself, but still requiring maybe a legitimate physical token for some of these things on top of that with some kind of segregated authent. Anyway, Lawrence, thought flow on you for passwordless environments.
I'm a fan of passwordless. The challenge there is that with deepfake technology, if you're using biometrics, you really can't validate for sure that it's them. So there's that. I do think that no matter where we shift things, the attacker just shifts too. I think that eventually, no matter what we do, we're gonna have this race condition, right? And so I'm hopeful that better preemptive cyber will be employed in those kind of scenarios as well. But to me, I'm a fan of going passwordless just because you get away from having something. Well, something becomes your actual wallet, or I'm a fan of PIN and biometrics in tandem, just because it makes it easier. Because I think it was you, Neil, that said that I'm tired of authenticating. I don't know if anybody else is, but my God, I mean, I have to authenticate 4 or 5 times a day. It drives me crazy. It's every other app, and that's not saying anything about Dispersive. I'm saying that in general on the internet, it's just crazy. And to me, I like the idea of passwordless helping eliminate and giving that more holistic SSO experience that we promised years ago. That's my take on it. But I definitely think you need to rely on the device too. But just be cognizant. Devices, things like the secure enclaves, the TEE, the SGX chipsets, all that isolation tech, it's been breached. There's side channel attacks. There's exploit code and all of that. So you just you can't look at security under a single lens.
So I brought that question up because we were talking about at the very beginning, fingerprinting the users, lowest common denominator, things like that. So in my mind, passwordless security kind of lends itself to supporting some portions of that thought flow. And this brings me to my second question for y'all. Since we decided to talk about crypto loosely, Lawrence, this is your fault. Blockchain. So blockchain and how it applies to a security perspective for these policies and procedures, and how we move forward with that construct that people want to apply to. For me as an Intel analyst, it basically helps me, or should help me, dedupe analytics and help me make sure I'm not a self-licking ice cream cone, all that stuff. But from a user analytics perspective, I'm kind of curious y'all's take on the application of blockchain potentially, or if y'all think
terrible visual, by the way, the self-licking ice cream.
That's a good question for Lawrence to begin with. I'm interested.
Oh, geez. I mean, I think. Look. I mean, let's boil it down or net it out, right? Blockchain is a hashing function. Over time, hash functions has always evolved. I mean, if you were to be as old as I am in security, you were looking up 56-bit hashes on VirusTotal, right? Now they're SHAs and So I think the benefit of blockchain is that you can do distributed and somewhat assured kinds of functions, whether it be apps or whether it be distributed data, data sharing and validation. But, I just got to be honest that, just like encryption, it's always a mantra forward, right? They crack this stuff. And already, back to quantum a little bit, there's been concern in the security community about the effects of quantum on things like Ethereum, right? what happened, or even Bitcoin? What happens when quantum arrives? Does that mean all of a sudden somebody can just swipe all my Bitcoin? And the answer is potentially yes, right? But it does have good applications, right? It's in intermediate applications where you have to share data or validate data, distribute, compute. There's certainly functions there. And then on the preemptive cyber side, I could see it being used more inside the machine, right? Imagine that, everything that you do, all the memory handling is done with a blockchain type concept. So that's a futuristic view, but we need better assurance of memory. We need better assurance of the execution of processes and all of that. So I could see it playing a role in creating a defensible architecture.
Fair enough.
I have a question. I'm interested, if this is okay, I'm interested in people's opinions. It's not to the same level as what we were just talking about, but it comes up in conversation, it comes up a lot internally with customers. User passwords, should people change their passwords regularly, or should they keep a really good, complicated password all the time?
I just want to interject real quick. We are going to build a whole episode around that because of how annoyed I am on that subject. But thank you for teeing that up. Someone feel free to take that and go whichever direction. And I hope you mentioned this.
Yeah, that's where you start.
Yeah. I'm bad at changing my passwords, I must admit. So I'm a password manager guy, and that keeps me honest, right? It keeps me on the rotating password theme. But, I think the answer is simply yes, right? You have to change passwords on a regular basis. They can't stagnate for too long. But,
Really?
that doesn't necessarily mean that you're more secure, right? Every time you change a password, you're also transiting that password. Go ahead, Neil.
I'm obviously antecedent to your statement. There's two approaches to this in my thought. If you are a product company, like all three of us here, four of us.
Yep.
Even though Elliot's marketing, but we count him in this because he works for a product company. My personal thought is, as technology evolves and the ability for threat actors to compromise those credentials through getting the encrypted repos or whatever it may be, my thought is, as a provider of a resource, it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we stay current with whatever the security not policy, but the security standards for making sure those stay secure, right?
Yeah.
Outside of the user. And
Agreed.
this goes back to passwordless environment and all this other crap and the burden on the user. The more you can remove the burden of security from the user, the less, and you have taken true ownership of it to make the path still secure, the less likely things are to screw up. Because let's admit it, us as users of other things are ignorant. Whether it's passwords, whether it's how we use passwords, password reuse, whether it's how we're logging in, where we're logging in from a VPN at a hotel, or not VPN, but from a Wi-Fi at a hotel to the airport open, right? We all make dumb mistakes as a general user group, right? People are inherently stupid as a group. So I say all that because, one, I don't think we should have to ever change our passwords while they still exist. Two, because I think the service I'm logging into and the tool I'm using should be smart enough to make sure that, aside from me being stupid and getting directly compromised, that where that lives should never have an issue whatsoever.
Yeah.
The other part of that being, if I'm compromised, then services have the capability to have awareness on that with the right tooling. There's companies out there that facilitate this, maybe not in the right timely fashion. But as an example, if you go into booking.com, and if your password you're using has been seen in some kind of compromise, you get an automated prompt that says, hey, you're a dumbass, you've been popped somewhere, whether it's through a breach somewhere else, or whether it's through, they have services that they procure that have insights on whether it's from malware or breach. And they don't outright tell you that it's malware, but they will also tell you should look at your box, right? That's my take on it. I think it's incumbent upon us as facilitators of a service to make sure we maintain security until the user shows how stupid or ignorant they are and what they're doing. And then we have to play whack-a-mole until they fix their things.
I agree with you. I actually agree with you that especially on this sort of thread, that the user needs to be simple. Security needs to be simple. I've even vied for this notion of having a personal SOC for the user, because the SOC doesn't know all the behaviors that you're doing in real time, even though they claim to. but they can't look at it all the time, right? But the user can, right? Which is, I think, informing the user is good. The other thing I think is there's also technical ways. Again, I'm going to keep harping on preemptive because I'm a preemptive trend guy. Is you can disperse the actual data. The password itself doesn't have to be in one single location, and that's one of the other things that is interesting on this new horizon, right? Is, imagine a password that's spread and dispersed, right? Same kind of thing that we do with our VPN and what my company does. But you can also make that data less relevant when it's breached, right? Or unreadable when it's breached. And not just with crypto, but spreading the data. And that's some of the new concepts that I've seen coming in the last 2 years when I was in the Gartner seat as an analyst. Is just imagine, I've often thought that we needed like this data loss detection technology that not DLP, but DLD. We go detect it on the dark web and then we take it down, right? And remove the value of the data somehow as well.
Yeah, I like the idea of spreading that data. That's why I do that physically. If my credit card expires, I'll cut it in half and put one in the trash and one in the recycling. I think, good luck. You get one, but not both.
Yeah. I know I'm a wild guy to talk to. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good. I think it's fun. And on that note of discovery, back on like I was talking about with the website and how they do it, there are certain companies. We've got brand awareness companies and brand breach notification companies, all those other things. But tying it into a full package of customer got popped, notify your customer, help them fix the problem, but make it as automated for you as a facilitator as possible until it just becomes a burden. Have policies in play that after X amount of times and password resets, that maybe you should have your customer SOC that does reach out and say, you know what, you're a bit of a problem child. Maybe there's something wrong with your box. We can't obviously go sit down with them and that would be very costly, but we can at least let them know that the reason why they're getting password prompts all the time, resets, is because they've done something somewhere probably more local, right? I think that's a great response ever. But we have to also think, once again, back to automation and things and us as analysts working in the system. What's the increase in burden and responsibility? Because Booking.com does this through a very purpose-built service that they procured. But I guarantee you, they're not talking with anybody when it gets cyclical. They're just, when it hits the database, you're prompted. Hits the database again, you're prompted. So every time that service they procured gets it net new, and if it's local to your box for malware, they are definitely not telling you you've got malware on your box. They're just telling you something's wrong, figure it out. We'll just keep doing the reset gain cycle every time you come back.
I mean, don't you hate getting treated like you're stupid as a user, though? I mean, I really don't like that. I actually think it's wonderful when SaaS providers that I belong to actually notify me of my security and kind of like give me easy access to being able to look at my logs and look at behaviors that might be strange. Because I think that we think of users as dumb, but frankly, there's a lot of people like yourself that know Python, right? And, I meet people out in the grocery store and they're like, oh yeah, I developed some Python, and I'm like, wow, that there's a lot more techies out there than I think we acknowledge.
Yeah, I think people respect transparency. If something's happened, tell me what happened, tell me why it happened. I'm not, it is what it is. I get it. It happens, but just tell me the truth.
Yep.
Point them to a GPT automated response.
Yeah.
But here's what happened. You got popped by malware. GPT says to do this. Go talk with them. I don't deny that it's good to be transparent. 110% as best as you can. If you blatantly know that they have a problem with their box, I think fair disclosure, you should tell them that. What happens after that is no longer your problem until it becomes your problem on your website again. But I also do think we're in a subset of weirdness versus the norm. I mean, we still have people eating Tide Pods. Let's put that into perspective a little bit, that was the normal thing not too long ago.
Oh, sorry. Did I say that?
Yeah.
So Tide Pods are not a good breakfast. I'm obviously doing this wrong.
No, that's for snacks only.
Yeah, they're snack only. And only if you get the ones with the orange and blue, not just the pure blue and white
Those are my favorite.
The tasty.
But no, I won't deny that. We should figure out a way to tell people legitimately as best as we can and have policy and procedure to notify them to the best of our knowledge from our intel repos of what is actually happening.
I think that the traditional thinking is that like investigators should never give their hand or things like that. And the SOC should never really just inform the user. And I really like to see that inverted. And sorry for harping on it.
Yeah. No, I think it's fair
I
play.
agree.
I think it's great. I think, once again, picking on a website that hopefully doesn't call us out on this, if anybody from there is ever listening, I just know this use case very intrinsically from other things. But back on that website, they do their thing. It's a very automated process flow. And like I said, the tools and resources they're using have a rudimentary understanding of where those credentials were harvested from. What got to that threat actor being able to have that cred that popped in the database. And, I do think a decent amount of people that were compromised, if you knew outright it was a malware, something on their box or potentially on their box, or maybe they logged into an internet cafe system, if those are still a thing, and got popped there, whatever. So it came from malware. I do believe the vast majority of users would take that and try to figure out what that was and try to see potentially if there's other things. I know anyone in my dad's age group probably would not. My dad would just be, I don't care. I've got $5 in there. Social security check doesn't come until next week. Whoop-de-doo. But we are in a much more tech savvy generation, regardless of what they're eating for breakfast. And fair disclosure, back when I first got started, that was how we did things. Ethical hacking 101.
Yeah.
If you knew something was screwed up, you didn't want to go to jail for it, but you couldn't either because there wasn't laws yet. Thank God. But you wanted to do that because you were just having fun. And you wanted to make sure nobody else could come in and legitimately do things maliciously. So we would tell them everything we found and pray to God that they hadn't worked with the FBI for new laws yet. And that's where we were
back in the day, we used to, in the admins, I go back to the BBS days, right? And there were ANSI bombs and, weird stuff like that where you would compromise the BBS login and you would drop to a command shell. But back then it was respect, right? We respected each other, we knew each other, and if we knew of a compromise or we knew, that their BBS could be compromised, we would let people know. And that's where full disclosure comes from, and vulnerability disclosure, and to me, we need to get back to some of that, right? We need to tell each other when things are going awry. My gosh, I see attacks coming all the time from the cloud, right? I should have a really easy way to notify them, and not just intelligence sharing, but, literally just say, hey, heads up, I'm seeing this happen. And I know that there's email addresses out there and abuse and stuff like that, but we need mechanisms to inform as well.
I feel the end users should have a responsibility to also take action, tell someone when something happens, because it's not acceptable to allow, let's say, your mailbox to spam everybody with links, because it's just constantly spreading the threat. So I think people need to.
So that's fun thought flow, because this comes back to the financial industry and burden and responsibility for compromise of a credit card. So I'm going to get the years wrong. It doesn't matter, but we've gone through a couple iterations of this over the last 25 years. First iteration was burden responsibility is on the local bank and you as the user if your card gets popped. Fraud mitigation strategies, fraud mitigation awareness and research, things like that were nominal at best at every bank back in the early 2000s. If your credit card got popped, they'd help you shut it down. Good luck getting money back. But what both the FBI, Department of Treasury, and some other fund entities within the state and local law enforcement pushed for mid-2000s timeframe was shifting the burden responsibility in order to make a better law enforcement case. Because if I went to local law enforcement, FBI, and had $300 missing from my account, whoop-de-doo. But if all 5 of us went there, 4 of us went there, I can count, I promise. If all 4 of us went there and we had $15,000 worth of liability and we made a single lawsuit, then someone could get interested in it and legally do something resource-wise. So the banks took the burden of responsibility for our fraud issues. So if I go to a gas pump and there's a skimmer on it, and they take that and run off with my $18,000 in whatever bank account I wish, but the $5.92 I have sitting there, then it doesn't matter. I get it back. The bank gives it to me. They file it into a larger case. So back on the email things and technology things, I think this goes back to what I was talking about, where the burden of responsibility for security and safety really goes on the person providing the resource, ultimately. And as much as the user should be vested in that, if I'm on Gmail and I've gotten popped and my Gmail is out there spamming, what do? They will shut it down.
Yeah.
You will get a wonderful prompt that says suspicious behavior, right? Cloudflare. You go into anything with a Cloudflare black, and you have to freaking authenticate yourself 83,000 times for 18 reCAPTCHA clicks the first time you go in there, because they have the burden and responsibility for the services they're providing to make sure that I'm obviously not doing anything dumb. Or if my network looks dumb, I still need to validate that I'm not part of the problem, right? So I think that's kind of where it comes in. People should be responsible, but we live in a society where they shuck that responsibility, whether on purpose or because they don't understand. And the security providers, I think, unfortunately, in some cases, fortunately, like financials, need to take on that ownership. So then when the real bad things happen, I can't go sue Russia, but Interpol and the United States can. If you're using my box for APT activity, awesome. I'm going to go back and research it. I appreciate it. Please use my box.
But I think informing users is important, but I think, to your point about kind of I do believe in shared responsibility to a point, but I worry about, grandma not knowing the latest hacks, right? So how's she going to know, that if I use my credit card this way and don't pull on the cover of the ATM machine, you got to have some, responsibility at the bank and in the card systems. And if they do a shit job, they should be fined for it, right? I
agree.
mean,
that's what October's for.
Yeah. And chargebacks, I don't know if you guys know this, but chargebacks are actually profitable for most credit card networks. They get to zap the money right out of the merchant's account and then charge a fee back to the merchant for any fraud. And it actually can be profitable for them in a lot of ways. Now, of course, if they wipe out the entire bank account of the merchant, that's different. But, a lot of times they just reach back in and they take their money back, they give it back to the user, and then they charge a fee for the transaction. And not only that, they get to keep the 3%.
Yeah, and then the last nugget on that, this is why when you do PayPal, Venmo, things like that, they have that, is this P2P or is it P to business, P2B, right? Yeah. Because the FTC and everybody else says burden and responsibility on private transactions because we're trying to state that they're non-taxable transactions, right? Mm-hmm. This is where our government is here in the U.S. for those not listening in the U.S. If it is a taxable transaction, the government will help you get your money back. If it is a non-taxable transaction or you list it non-taxable, congratulations, you own the burden of responsibility for the fraudulent issues that happen. Yeah. Unless it's a blatant attack against your account, right? If it's a legit exposure of funds. But if you are being solicited and you wrongly transfer money and they can prove that you voluntarily did that and you listed P2P in those applications, nobody's legally required to do anything to help you get that money back. I didn't know that. Now, that's different from checking accounts and other things. This is specific for P2P operations through mobile banking transactions. Now, your bank can choose to do otherwise directly as the actual bank, but the solicitors on your behalf, like PayPal's, Venmo's, and so on and so forth, Cash App, they legally are not required to follow fraud, and they're legally not required to follow up on any recourse to try to get funds back. And they will often tell you to literally go to your bank. I ran through this with some people 6 months ago on a private gig. They lost at a nonprofit, accidentally lost a lot of money because they were told to list it as a P2P transaction because they were nonprofit. And instead of soliciting for advice from the lawyers, they did exactly that. And they lost a rather large scale quantity of money. And we were only able to recover some of it. The other last nugget I was curious about for y'all's perspective, just still on the slight blockchain piece again, the security of documents and product online within control mechanisms, as in putting control mechanisms on basically a PDF, right? Or the construct around the rest of that. So we talk about lowest common access, but when I email one of y'all a PDF, I know there are solutions that are promoting this, but do y'all see that as a legitimate, congratulations, companies are going to start doing this more formally to provide access control and out-of-bound security on things once they email it to that third party, stuff like that. Access control mechanisms.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you should ask because I've recently been going through some immigration documents to move down to the US from Canada, actually. And one thing I had to do was write a notarized letter just, stating who I am. And I had a notary public do the signing for me. And it was done virtually over Zoom like this. And I was given a PDF that was, it had some kind of certificate, I'm guessing, and it had that it was signed by the lawyer. But I had to print it to give it to them. So all of a sudden, all of that became just nonsense. So I feel like it's almost like a compliance checkbox that is just so to say, yeah, I checked the box, rather than in the interests of security, in my experience anyway.
So before you go into it, the reason why I'm asking, so the company I work for by proxy, I get to work with a lot of sharing communities, ISACs, ISAOs, some private trust groups, things like that. Things I've also been working with prior to this company. So they're kind of near and dear to me for how we do business within that world. And one of the always ongoing concerns for any community is, and I think, Lawrence, you alluded to this lightly about, once we share something, what happens to it and exposure to what we're researching.
Yep.
So that's a primary concern. So that's why I'm bringing this question up, because if I create a report that's specific to X industry vertical that I'm operating in, I need to make sure that, that nobody takes that and immediately emails that out of bounds to another district, another sector, or even their friend down the street because he happened to work at Walgreens. And, this is a healthcare related report or whatever, but my buddy is a clerk at Walgreens, thought he'd be interested in it, and crap like that. And now it's out there, right? Stuff like that.
I think that if in theory, I'd like to have data where the controls follow the data, right? I mean, obviously, it makes a lot of sense. This harkens back to DRM, right? And DRM browsers and content in there. You used the example of PDFs. They're kind of like the bane of existence because it's like an entire programming language bundled into a binary, right? But to me, it's like the most exploited thing out there, right?
But we got rid of Flash, so we're
yes,
okay.
we got rid of Flash. Java, yeah. But yes. The answer is that data, and there's some concepts where this is emerging, and it goes back to preemptive, right? It goes back to the controls should follow the data, right? I think Oracle has like ZPR, which is Zero Trust Routing Protocol, and basically the NICs, and there's a driver involved where the data, when it goes between systems, the NICs and everything in the cloud is aware of that data exchange and the permissions. I think that's obviously the direction everything heads, is to have, all data kind of be validated. The problem is there's a lot of different people that want to profit on that different ways, right? And I don't know how that shakes out, but I do know that of course, media, content delivery, those kinds of things should have some kind of way to control who can access it. But I don't know if I have the best answer.
No, fair enough. And last little nugget, I think, before we go ahead and maybe wrap up, pending what y'all have else. But the other thing is, this problem that I'm asking about was loosely taken care of on the government side of the house 15-ish, 17 years ago as a primary vertical. So I leave people with this. For the most part, what we do in cybersecurity today is what the government attempted to do 2, 3, 5 years ago. Even if we seem like they're just now getting to it behind the curve, they had somebody talk about it before. Like Zero Trust is a great example from an adoption perspective as a policy and procedure, and it does help drive our capability to be able to get adoption in products and things moving forward. Once the government says, hey, congrats, this multi-trillion-dollar industry says, we like it, let's go make more of it. So I just think it's fascinating for me because I grew up in the Intel community, seeing that as a primary thing. And then I get here, I didn't think nothing of it until, one of the first documents I sent ended out somewhere it shouldn't have, to someone who I thought was trusted. And partially on me for not doing due diligence when I was sharing, but it is what it is.
Just don't
So
use
did
your
you say?
Oh, sorry. Did I say that?
Would
Go
you
ahead,
say
Albert.
that then cybersecurity in the government is similar to kind of like aerospace, where you could say, look at this aeroplane in the public eye, but just, imagine what's behind the scenes. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah, I do. And I will say that time frame, just like with anything technology, Moore's Law and everything else, included here, it used to be way the heck this far apart. What the government was doing, and before it was even called cybersecurity in the mid 90s, right? InfoSec and IT ops and stuff like that. And, we were tracking what we now call APTs before that was even a term.
Yeah.
Back in, I think, formally, publicly announced the first tracked threat group in cyber was in 1997 or 98. And if you look at the wikis, you'll find some of these things that got popped off in 2003, 4 about all that stuff. Moonlight Maze and some other things.
Worm.
Yeah.
Morris.
But, APT-related government entity tracking, things like that, we were doing that 14, 15 years before the APT-1 report. And then, to be fair, public sector versus private sector was getting on board with that mentality of threats targeting them specific financial services being a really good example of this
Mm-hmm.
before APT1. But it didn't become popular until the government said, yeah, we should pay attention to this. Here's APT1 kind of deal. And there you go. Now it's the flavor. It's been the flavor for 13 years for all this stuff, which is great for me. Job security as an intel analyst. Thank you.
It is.
So yeah, I agree.
Thanks
yes.
for what you
look
did.
at the government. Thank you.
I mean, seriously, it's awesome work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's the only reason why Elliot can put up with me, because I can drink more than him. I don't have a liver anymore. Or
You
kidney.
sure?
That
We haven't
helps.
tested that
He's
theory
got a tin
yet.
can. It's not a liver.
I just got a straight line from here back out to the bag. It's filtered. We go through it again. We're good. We're all good. But anyway, gentlemen, no, I appreciate you, managing my lines of questioning and thought collateral here on this fun episode. Very open, very candid discussions. I appreciate that.
Thank you,
And
everybody.
just a quick recap of some fun stuff. We went down some fun rabbit holes, but the construct here being around where are we at moving into this year, and I think zero trust in general as a construct. Finally moving to an adaptive security policy where we start removing privileges, least common privilege. I do agree, Oliver, that I think one, not only should that be a requirement, but I think we're finally getting to where that's starting to become a norm of an idea. Thankfully. I think as we move over to adaptive technologies, Lawrence, and how to do more denial and deception to keep out in front, I love that. I hope we do a lot more of that this year. I think that is and should be the norm, to combine with how we're fingerprinting our users and how we're mitigating potential strategies. But all in all, I think we all agree, need to get to a more proactive approach in how we're defending our environments and stop playing whack-a-mole. We talk about it, but I think now is finally time with technology and resources and cost to actually be able to do that. Hopefully people take that on out there and look at what's available and move forward with those
Almost
ideas.
every EDR tool is being owned right now.
It's true.
Every one of them.
Yeah, I think detection, like you said earlier, is a very valuable layer, but if you're relying on that alone, it's not a great idea, right?
Yeah.
Thanks so much for your
With
time.
that, gentlemen, I'm
Sure.
throw it back over to Elliot and he'll close this out.
Elliot.
Yeah.
Thanks,
All
Neil.
right. That takes us to the end of the official first episode of hopefully season 4. We'll figure it out and I'll just dub it over with some magic AI or something. That said, Oliver, I'm going to look to you for this answer because I actually don't remember off of my head. But Neil and I will be over at Zero Trust World. When is that? Where is that?
19th of February, the Caribe Royale in Orlando, and I'm going to be there as well, which means we'll have some fun.
Nice.
Amazing. We are going to test Neil's liver situation. I
I
guess
was just
maybe
gonna
an
say.
off-hour.
I will help. I'll help.
Wonderful.
enjoy.
All right. Thank you all for joining. We'll see you next episode.
Good to
Thank
meet
you
you all.
very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to AZT, an independent podcast. Your hosts have been Neil Dennis and Elliot Volkman. To learn more about the series, catch past episodes, or about Zero Trust, go to adoptingzerotrust.com. You can also subscribe to our newsletter for additional insights. Viewpoints expressed during this show do not reflect the brands or employers of our hosts or guests.